What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this podcast. We help recruit today's go-to-market teams that will build the next generation of unicorns. This podcast is also now being sponsored by Allego. For all you sales leaders out there, if you ever absolutely nailed sales training or had a rep who killed a presentation that you wished you recorded to be seen later by new hires or other members of the team, well, that's just one of the things that Allego can do. Not only does it allow you to record your best content for practice, collaboration, and feedback, but it gives you a way to organize all of your best content in one place so it's easily accessible to help improve sales performance for everyone. Email me, web@thejdavidgroup.com, so I can personally introduce you to someone who will take great care of you. Now, my guest today is Ramsey Al Ramahi, a self-proclaimed startup fiend who's been a part of three great Y Combinator companies as a sales leader, where he's developed a track record of scaling teams and rapidly growing revenue. Now, because he is a startup fiend, he's in the process of launching his own startup, which I will ask him about a little later. Ramsey, welcome to Over Quota.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the self-proclaimed startup fiend. It's like a drug that just keeps on giving, just slapping your wrist. No, but thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's just start there with the self-proclaimed startup fiend. I mean, obviously, it goes back to when you were a child. Tell me about that. Tell me about your upbringing and the entrepreneurs that you were around growing up.
Yeah. It's one of those things I think, I'm sure some people can relate. Just like you have a soft spot in your heart for it, right? Like when you just like are attracted to like a certain type of thing, a certain type of person. For me, it's like a certain type of startup, right? So I was born and raised in Iraq. I came here at the age of 7. My parents were entrepreneurs and business owners back there, and they were entrepreneurs and business owners here. Actually started going back to like, even when I first came to this country, actually, I was an ice cream man who used to drive around in our community, and I didn't know a lick of English at all. And he happened to speak Arabic. So I created this bond with him. And so a couple of years passed when we actually ended up visiting, and we ended up staying as asylums. And then my dad came here a couple of years later as a refugee. And so when he arrived, he needed a job, I introduced him to Ice Cream Man that was driving around because I didn't know anybody else. I was the only network of one person. That's all I had for my dad. So I introduced him, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I'm actually like, I could rent you out an ice cream truck if you like." And so really, that's like what's kind of funny. That's kind of where it all started, right? Like, he rented out an ice cream truck. He didn't know a word of English. I knew, a little English now at this point, so I would hop in an ice cream truck with him and sell ice cream. Because he could drive, I couldn't drive. I was like 12, 14, whatever I was at. Actually, 12 years old when he came, and I would just sell ice cream the whole time. And then he ended up buying the ice cream truck, ended up buying the fleet of ice cream trucks, and the distributor, and everything else, and ended up calling that business Ramsey Ice Cream, actually. So kind of pulling it in full circle, right? So like it's just that being very attracted to people who are like entrepreneurs or hustlers who are trying to build something or trying to make something of themselves, to disrupt a market. I think I've always been that soft spot in my heart goes back to that more than anything else, right? Like I could sympathize and I could feel, and I've done my own thing as well. I've started my own business, and it's kind of like giving birth, like raising a kid, right? Just like you just want to make sure to take care of it. And when you see that from somebody, that passion across, you just get really magnetized towards it.
You mentioned heart and feel, which is something that I wanted to follow up on, which is, what is that? What looking back on that 12, 14 years of age, seeing your father do that and actually grow his ice cream business and you helping him, what was the feeling that you had? Was it joy? Was it proud? Was it excitement? Like, and was there a moment or two where you can remember that says like, that you can point to and say, wow, that was awesome?
Yeah. First word that comes to mind when you say that, goosebumps. It's like something that gives you goosebumps. It's almost like a fear, right? That feeling is like a fear, but it's not really fear. there's a sense of fear where like you're scared to do something, like I shouldn't do this. And I think that's what holds us back from doing something. And people take a step back and not do it. Right. But then there's like this sense of fear and that gives you goosebumps. And you're like, I'm going to go in on it. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to just jump in and I'm going to figure it out. And it's that sense of like, almost like that excitement, right? The thing, something that gives you goosebumps that you're excited for. I think that's what it really comes down to. It's also similar to like, I played hockey growing up, and every single game, no matter what, for some reason, it just had the same kind of excitement. When I was on the rink when the game started, right? I was first string, not on the bench. I always got excited. And for some reason, every time I was on the rink when the game started, I got the same level of goosebumps. So it's like I'm pumped, like I'm out, like on the first string. Let's go, right? Like it just, there's something about it that just I think that feeling that just like you're like almost like addicted. That's that start of fiend. You're like there's an addiction to it. Like you're like give me some more. I like those goosebumps.
That's right. That endorphin hit.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously you followed in your father's footsteps and started your own business. Tell me a little bit about that before we get into tech companies.
Yeah, that actually is kind of like led me to tech companies. Baklava business. Maybe there's, actually, as you were talking, maybe there's a pattern there, right? Like he was an ice cream business, sweets, desserts. Then it went, fast forward to what, 2008, 2007 is when I launched a baklava business. It's a 3-generational family recipe. My grandma, my aunt, my mom, everybody just like had always made this baklava every year around holiday season. And growing up, right, in this country, like the firefighters got it, the hospitals got it on every floor, all my teachers got it, my cousins' teachers got it. Like it just became like literally became like the world's like the people's most lovable baklava. The people would wait for it, right? And so that was my slogan: "Is the world's most love it, the world's most lovable baklava," and it had an upside down heart because it really was like that. Like, it goes back to that feeling that it created, right? Like that's the experience I got from having that the baklava around every holiday season. That's an experience that people felt every holiday season. They were anxiously waiting for it. So grew up with that recipe. So I grew up with that, and then that 3-generation family recipe. I've always wanted to see my parents do something with it. And fast forward 2007 to 2008, I'm like, Mom, why don't you just create a baklava company? And my mom, being a foreigner, she goes like, I don't know how. Why don't you do it? I'm like, okay, I'll take it on. So, my claim to fame is I've made over 1 million pieces of baklava on my own bare hands before I was able to get out of the kitchen, believe it or not. Obviously had to master and figure out how to make baklava because I'd never even made it before then. But launched that business, sold it to hundreds of different retailers as well. And it was, we made very unique flavors of like peanut butter, chocolate, butterscotch, like pumpkin during the holidays. It was like similar to like, I would say Spin Coast cupcakes to cupcakes as like baklava is to baklava, right? So very high end, handcrafted baklava. That was an amazing journey, honestly. I think there's a lot of the foundational things that I have brought into SaaS really come from the baklava business. I often relate everything I do into that. There's a lot of like, it goes back to that feeling, those goosebumps as somebody who's like given birth to a business, knows all the different moving parts. And I think that's definitely helped me in my career and where I'm at right now.
So a lot of people would be curious to know, how did you make that transition out of that business into software technology company? Because I talk to people all the time who are trying to make that transition, and the answer is we need somebody that has relevant experience, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about that transition.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay. Look for that connection, right? Look for that connection. So in my case, it was there was a direct correlation between like, okay, so I sold to a whole bunch of retailers, right? That was like cafes, coffee shops, high-end restaurants, and it was I had a Rolodex of contacts there, right? My first job was with 5 stars in the SaaS business. Obviously, like, my skill set, the sales, That was my bread and butter. I had my creative outlet was the Bottle business. And I think that was really kind of like what energized me, right? I was definitely much more of like on the sales forefront of the business. And then creative, I would say the second. But business operations and everything else was probably like last, right? Like that was one of those things I struggled with at the beginning, until really I got a lot of coaching in the beginning to figure that piece out. So knowing my passion was sales and knowing what my skill set is with sales, and I was able to prove that out in that business. But also knowing my network is tons of small business owners, cafes, coffee shops, restaurants. You find something that's fairly relative, right? For me, I started working at 5 stars, and that was really what I had an opportunity to work for a company that, this is the hustle mentality, work for a company who was going to pay me a salary, pay me benefits, and sell to the same business owners that I already had a Rolodex of, right? So I'm like, this is amazing, right? So I could do both of my jobs at the same time, right?
Yes.
So
Right.
that was my transition. That was my transition into SaaS, and I've always wanted to get into SaaS, but I never, really was able to find that opportunity until at that point. So find something that's relative. Find that connection between what your skill set is, what your what you have around you, what your network is, what you enjoy. I think that's an easy transition. I enjoy selling to small businesses, right? Mom and pop shops. I had a connection with them. It was a little different, right? You go and you're on the ground, and so it's like you can't just. A lot of times, you just got to pop in and be yourself and be able to have that conversation rather than just like trying to cold call. I just enjoyed that a little bit more at that point, right? And so that was my my transition into SaaS.
Speaking of hustle, how long did you have the baklava business while you were still doing that? Like, I'm assuming it sort of was tandem for a while before you phased it out.
Yeah. So it actually still somewhat exists in a very small scale, a very small scale. So mom had taken it over, and I had passed it on to mom once I got a lot of traction at 5 stars and really started enjoying what I was doing. The business was pretty much built. Accounts were already there. Soon after, we decided to transition to just strictly wholesale, and there's a handful of wholesale accounts that are still being served that my mom manages. And it's kind of like my mom's little kid, right? Like it's the family recipe. Like you keep it alive to make mom happy, type of thing. But it's really just at this point staying stagnant, honestly. And if it wasn't for mom's happiness, I probably would just close it down at this point, right? We got rid of a certain type of package and actually reduced a lot of the retail accounts and then increased the wholesale side. So so the transition was handed over to the person who actually had given birth to it and go do what I enjoy.
Right. Yeah. Giving birth to it and you.
Yeah.
Let's get into Apollo, because that's interesting just on many different levels. But the first level is, well, you know what? I'll let you tell it. What was the situation at Apollo? And frankly, even give you your relationship with Apollo before you jumped on board there, and tell me what state they were in before you decided to jump on board.
Yeah, it's actually a great transition. Because so my time at 5 stars, I was there for 4 years. The second half of my career at 5 stars, I helped launch the enterprise team that didn't exist before, because we were normally selling to SMBs, and obviously having like this passion of like just think big, like why don't we sell to these larger accounts? And in doing that, Adam Carr, who was my boss at that point, that helped me launch this enterprise team. He introduced me to Apollo, then was called Zen Prospect. He's like, hey, you might want to check out this platform. Kind of unique. They're right across the ops from us in SF. And I ran into the guys, but love to introduce you and see what you think. And so we used them, and we made the intro. We made an intro to Roy Chung, one of the co-founders, who's an amazing human being all around, to be honest with you. And he really was just like trying to get this business off the ground. And I love the concept that they had. They had, this data. It was a data provider as well as a sales and enablement platform. Like it was almost too good to be true, right? Like all in one. Because typically you see like an outreach sales loft and a data provider that's plugged in, and however it integrates with Salesforce at that time. And it's just pretty much of a mess. Like you have to manage multiple different platforms. And so I love the fact that everything was in one platform. And I saw that they were like, again, that entrepreneur mindset. They were very hungry for feedback, very hungry for growth, the disruptor, which I absolutely loved. And I felt like I had actually a lot of like hands-on experience on like building that part of that company. I would message like there's James Long, who was still with the company. He was like the customer success, but he was also a salesperson. And it's a very small company at that point, right? But we'd give him a lot of feedback constantly through chat. So used Apollo literally firsthand. It felt like I had like a hand in building as I gave them so much feedback. To this day, there's like things and features that they have that I think that I've given them feedback on that still exist, right? Or I've given them ideas for. And so I felt like I've had a lot of a lot of heart for this company earlier on. And that led me to move to Steelhouse. After that, I brought Apollo into Steelhouse. And then when I went after Steelhouse, it was obviously just normal for me to join Apollo. I started having conversations with Roy about joining Apollo in mid 2018, and then they got hacked in late 2018, and so that kind of paused the conversations for a little bit. And I ended up joining them in May 2019. That was the first hire post breach, so they had shrunk from like 55, 60 employees to like 12 employees, I believe. And I was the first hire post breach when I joined. And so it goes back to that, like that company that gives you goosebumps, that disruptor of like why you join, what you want to be a part of. And so I had joined the company and literally like to help turn around from that point on.
Why? What did you? I understand you really loved the product, of course, because you were a multiple time user of the product, and frankly, as you just said, it really helped them form and shape the product, if you will. Most people would have headed for the hills, right? After something like that, where there was a data breach, where you see a company go from 55 to 60 down to 12 employees. I know you got goosebumps, but what about it gave you goosebumps?
For the lyric that comes to mind is "I believe I can fly." It's that belief, right? That's I actually had my then fiance, now wife. I vividly remember a very, very heavy argument that we actually, why are you leaving this awesome, amazing, stable culture that you have at this company called Steelhouse, now called Mountain, that's growing, to a sinking ship? Like, this just does not make any sense. And I'm like, no, don't worry. Like, just trust me. I believe in this thing. It's like, but they are failing miserably. Why are you doing this? But I go back, because I believe I can fly. When you believe in something and you have faith in something, I was willing to take that risk. It was actually a really horrible time for us to take that risk. We weren't like doing too well financially, had just seen jobs, we had just moved. There was she didn't work for a few months. It was probably even more of a riskier bet personally. But because I believed, I know that didn't matter. I just knew I knew they were disrupting the industry. I love the product. I was a champion of the product. I've used the product, the platform itself. I knew what it's capable of. I knew the amount of work it needed to get to really take everyone out, other competitors out. And I absolutely love Roy. He was one of the co-founders. Love the founders all across the board. But Roy was like a champion. He was a believer. He saw something in me to be able to give me a shot. I saw something in them, and it was just that's the synergies match. I think that's really an important piece. But I believe in the product. I knew what it was capable of. I knew it was a disruptor. I'm a big fan of disruptors, right? As I mentioned. And I just decided to take that leap.
I always try to talk about vision, strategy, and execution. What was the vision that you saw? In other words, you believed in it. You saw it. You saw how strong the product was. You believed in the founding team. Like, all of those pieces were in place. So then if you looked at it and said, okay, in a year from now, however far out you were looking, like, what did you see in terms of headcount growth, revenue? Just give me a sense of what was out there beyond the horizon that you were looking at.
I mean, I saw it as like a quick 1,000-person company, right? And it's still not there yet, right? It's like you just aim high, right?
Yeah,
like,
right, okay.
And similar to my experience at Five-Star, I'm like, why don't we just go for the biggest accounts out there, right? And I think that's what you got to go in, because at the end of the day, you can aim, there's a goal and there's like a stretch goal, right? And I try to avoid looking at the goal because you'll ultimately get there if you just aim for the stretch goal, right? Don't black out the regular goal and just focus on completely like the stretch goal, right? And I think you'll that's it. Aim for the stars, you'll get somewhere in between, right?
Yeah.
So I always envision it being much larger in life because I'm like, how come nobody else is using an all-in-one platform as a salesperson who has to use multiple platforms? Like, why am I doing X, Y, and Z when I could just do X, right? Like all one platform. And I feel like the world need to know about it, right? And I think it needed to be packaged a little differently. And I think I had, because I was a user of the platform and champion of the platform, I believe that I had a way to be able to package it and present it to other prospects in a way that was different than maybe they had to package it.
Couple of strategic follow-up questions, which is, if you see 1,000-person company at that point, in your mind, how were you going to get there? What were some of the steps that you needed to take? And you mentioned, packaging. Was that the first step? Was in terms of changing the messaging? Was it hiring the right people? Give me a sense of what strategically you would need to do to get to those number of people.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I'm glad that Roy gave me a shot because the candid answer is I don't know. Right. I didn't know. Right. And I think that's the beauty of what passion and heart and hustle does for you. Right. Like it was the company where I was given a shot to figure it out. And what was really cool about Apollo is, and the mindset to this day, I know it exists. They really didn't, and Tim and Roy and Ray, like really are. A lot of companies, I think, try to figure out what works and then stop at that point. This is what works. Let's stop, right? And then let's move on because we figure out what works. But Apollo does really, really well. And this is the mindset they instilled in me. And I absolutely love it. Love them for that, because this is my mindset moving forward. Any company I go to, it's really, let's figure out what doesn't work, right? Instead of let's figure out what works. And so that gives me the ability and the freedom and the power to go, hey, Ramsey, go, just don't do anything. Just go there and try it and figure out if it doesn't work. And if you go with that mentality, it's like that's the true fail forward mentality. People, you hear that often, like fail forward, but nobody talks about the recipe to get there. They usually say, just go try things and figure it out. But like, it really is, if you look at it as like, let's go into it and figure out what doesn't work rather than trying to figure out what works. I think in my mind, at least, you're more likely to try more things, and when going into it, knowing that, and more than likely your goal is to fail like that. And it makes failure actually be very exciting. Like, oh yeah, I figured out what doesn't work. That was a horrible failure. Let's go. So.
Yeah, I love that. So then as you were doing that, right? As you were driving fast and taking chances, as one of my old bosses used to say way back in the day, what did you find wasn't working? And then how quickly, when you're in that mindset and you're going, how quickly do you change, right? Or how much information or data, whatever you want to use, before you decide we are heading in the wrong direction? This isn't the right strategy. We need to change directions.
Yeah. There's so much I can unload on this part, right? So, so I'll take a step back on this. So I think we talked about this on one of our calls. People and rhythm, right? I'm a big fan of people and rhythm, and I think if you have the right people, they're the ones who get the job done. And we can dive deeper in this as well. And you have the right rhythm, you can really accomplish anything that you want, that you set your mind to. But that rhythm piece that we're talking about right now, and to answer your question, that rhythm piece is really critical about figuring out what works, what doesn't work. If you have a rhythm and you're constantly touching base and constantly being able to track what's working, what's not working, you're able to adapt. You have that transparency. The entire ship's able to move really quickly, right? Obviously, easier with a smaller company. That's the beauty of startups, right? Being able to pivot. But it was quite often, even at Apollo, we figured out what didn't work, like messaging in general, right? Like really breaking down the pitch. I had literally the entire pitch broken down. Like, okay, let's see the major components of, in this example of like, let's see the major components of the pitch. So we got intro, we got setting agenda, we got or breaking the ice, like literally just building a massive checklist of all these things, and then looking at all the calls and seeing what's working and what's not, and what things were happening that made a call successful versus what weren't. And you can literally just build a checklist across the board. We would use, you could use Chorus Gone, whatever maybe we were using Chorus at that time. Track the words that were being used. What are great trigger words? Call length, what topics, like you could look at source, and you could look at like every little tidbit of the call and really be able to track. And I think getting granular is really kind of like what worked on the sales side. But along the way is you get a chance to test out everything else that doesn't work. So if, for example, if a rep was trying to use a certain line or describing, or elevator pitch was 2 minutes long versus 30 seconds long, or if somebody went into the data side versus the enablement side first, or if like discovery was not done properly, try something new, constantly try something new, fail forward mentality.
And you could see that, I'm assuming, somehow in the conversion rates, right? In terms of, like you mentioned, 2-minute pitch as opposed to 30 seconds or something like that, that you can see that, the conversion rate were down or lower in those instances as opposed to some of the others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, everything's, the numbers don't lie type of thing, right? But it's still there's a qualitative and there's a quantitative part.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could track everything, but there's a certain element of it that like you can't measure this interaction right now, right? Or we have a good synergy, we're having momentum, we're having like good conversation. Right. How do you track that, right? There's a certain way, there's a certain element of it, it's just more of a feeling, but that qualitative part, right? But then there's the element of like quantitative, like, okay, so I know if I had a conversation for 30 minutes, that's more likely to close, for example. I know how many touch points we've had, that's more likely to close. The qualitative part is like, well, based on your interaction, obviously with me, what do you feel like the likelihood of this to close, right? And why, right? Like those are important things to measure across every sales cycle, honestly.
I believe there's some AI or machine learning somewhere that actually can measure the qualitative, parts of
sentiment.
Sentiment.
Yeah, sentiment. Yeah, there's a platform. Maybe throwing a plug here that I think is really cool. It's called Sybil, Sybil. I want to say. They actually measure sentiment as well. So like how many times you nod your head, how many questions you got. I think it's really cool. But there's so much like that's coming out, honestly, and there's a lot of amazing tools.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Somebody that I want to get on the podcast, she's the CRO of a company called Mersion that ultimately creates human-like figures on the other side of a screen and mimics, this kind of a thing, right? Conversation.
Wow.
So that if you're, let's say a doctor and you want to practice your bedside manner or crisis management, or frankly telling somebody that they have cancer as an example, it's like you can do that with a human back to you. So it's just
wow.
Amazing. Yeah, just amazing.
Wow.
Let me ask you this, speaking of humans, and one of the things that you had just mentioned a couple of minutes ago there is having the right people. Talk to me about your philosophy on sales coaching and development. I heard you say somewhere where you were championing for like a director of people something. What was it?
Yeah. Director of
personal development. Yeah.
Personal development. Yeah. So I think that's like my dream role. And I think, and it's funny because I was actually just chatting with Kevin Dorsey about this, Katie, and we just hit it off about this piece specifically, that if you take care of people, just take care of people, like forget like just work, just take care of people, like as people, as human beings. Like I will repeat it 10,000 times. Take care of people. The rest will follow, right? Just take care of people. Like it's simple. It's take care of people, like 4 words. We're all human, right? And I think I truly believe that if you're able to, I'm going to say it 10,000 times, take care of people, they will accomplish whatever you possibly could ever set for them. Nobody comes in their job every day going, let me do whatever I can to fail. Right. If you hire the right people, you want to make sure they're curious, want to make sure they're passionate. Leaning with curiosity, being genuine, if you're hiring for a role for sales, obviously make sure they're consultative or whatever type of sales role that you're looking for. They care about the mission. They have that personal growth interest. All these things, like there's a lot of obviously characteristics, but once you find that person that checks the bill, take care of them. If you select the right person, nobody's going to come into a role saying, I'm going to come up and show up to work every day so I could do worse than I did yesterday. Like, nobody, like who does that, right? If you find that right profile, why would they do that? They're not going to do that. You and I won't do that. Nobody else doesn't want to do that. Right. But it's usually, I think, when people think that person is failing, it's usually because like that person obviously is not getting the growth that they need. There's that cliche and cheesy answer when in interview questions. I don't even know if it's used these days anymore, but like, what are you looking for in this next opportunity? And it's always the answer, like the opportunity for growth. It's a cheesy answer, but there's a reason why it's cheesy, because like some of the cheesy stuff is actually true, but you just got to pry it apart and phrase it differently ultimately, right? But that opportunity for growth is what is common because people are looking for that, right? And I think I often say it's like if you want to retain talent, you coach people out. And I say that because like if you coach people to what their personal and professional goals are, they're much more likely to stay. If people are getting the growth they are at the company that they're with, why would they leave? There's no reason for them to leave. I've been very, 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 very fortunate. And I don't know if it's a skill or I've just been very lucky, honestly, at this point. But I do think because I haven't had to focus on this, and then hopefully this is why it's working. But I've only ever had to let go of 2 people I've ever hired.
Wow.
And I feel and again, knock on wood, because I don't want to mess up that stat. I don't want to see another person go, honestly. And I do think that everybody, if you hire right, that everybody wants to grow. And if you provide them the right growth, you'll retain all the talent. I don't think there would be an issue. And if they do go somewhere else, be happy for them, right? Like people I've hired and coached have gone on to bigger, better roles. And I love seeing that. I get more joy from that than them staying, to be honest with you. Like I actually love for them to stay, but if they're going somewhere else to a similar role elsewhere, I'm always kind of disappointed. I'm like, well, like you're better than that, right? But when they go somewhere else to a higher role, I mean, how can you not just be beyond proud of them, right? At that point, and that speaks volume of like the growth that you've been able to provide them.
That's what I was about to say too. But for your ability as a manager, as a coach, they would not have had that opportunity, right? We see that all the time in professional sports, where a defensive coordinator that worked for Bill Belichick or something now is an offensive coordinator somewhere, right? And hopefully Bill Belichick and others are proud of the family tree, so to speak, that they've been able to spawn, for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of other questions here, and to my audience, I will just acknowledge that you'll notice that this interview will be shorter than most, as I was saying earlier, that I have a call shortly right after this podcast, to be honest with you, that I have to get ready for. So I apologize for the truncated episode. But one thing that I want to mention to you or ask you about is something that I heard in another podcast. Is you said we often coach on the what rather than how to think of the why. Like, can you just unpack that for me? Something I was extremely curious about, and I wanted to know your thought process behind that statement.
We need another couple hours for this one. I'll try to make this one brief. So I was as a rep, I always wanted to know the why, right? Like, it's like that kid. It's like, but why? And if I did not know the why, I did not believe in the mission, right? But then you start getting the why, and then you start figuring out why do you look at the why like that? Like how did you get there? Then you start becoming more curious, because I think that curious kid just ends up becoming more curious the more you give them, right? Maybe that's why I really enjoy sales, I should say. So I think the what of the why really comes down to how can you let your team understand how you think of the why? And if they could understand how you think of things, they're much more likely to let you lead and follow your lead, because they understand your thought process. If I'm being consistent in what I want to achieve and what I want them to achieve, and how I actually look at and literally explain to them, like actually show them, break it down of how I actually look at challenges, solutions, problems, whatever you want to call it, and everything we have set in place. They're more likely to actually take the lead and follow through before I even acknowledge it. They're more likely to see things. They're boots on the ground. They're more likely to see the what and the why and how, because they understand how I'm conceptualizing it. And so that really comes back to like the root of it is not just like transparency as in like insight, but full transparency into how you win, how you succeed, how you fail, how you think, why you think that way, how you form that thought, the reasons behind why you think that way, what you look for, the good, the bad, the ugly. Like you literally tell them like hey, there's some, quite often we see decisions being made, and as a rep, and I'm like, well, why'd you make that decision? If that doesn't make sense, and you just get told of the result. You don't really the decision. You don't really get told everything that went behind it. And so quite often people leave the meetings, right? Like, oh, we had to make this decision. And what happens typically? Everybody leaves the meeting, right? And quiet. And like they say, it's a big decision. Everybody leaves, they turn around, they go to the desk, or they go on their phone, texting, whatever it may be, in a group chat, on Slack, whatever it may be. You go, what the heck, right? Like, why do you? So that happens because I experienced it a lot. Whether I was part of it or not, I saw it a lot. So why would you let that happen? Like, how can you prevent that from happening, right? Like, you want people to go to a public forum and say, hey, cool, we're all on the same page. And you don't want, why are you gonna distract people with that kind of talk, right? It doesn't need to happen if you're fully transparent. It saves everybody time. So again, I could talk about this for 2 hours. I can give you like a million different examples, but I think that piece is really important for the camaraderie, for the growth, culture. All that thing is like foundational for growth.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we're going to have to do a part 2 of this because there's a lot there that we can cover as well. There's one thing that you mentioned as well, which is, the why, like, why are you doing these things? And it reminds me of a book that I read called Influence by Robert Cialdini. It's like Influence, the Power of Persuasion. And I looked at it as a marketing book. There's like 7 levers to influence that he mentions, but one of them is the why. And he gave an example of even raising kids and just saying the word because after you tell them not to do something, goes a long way. And since I've read that book several years ago, I've tried it and it's helped so much. So that word why is super powerful and important. So thank you for sharing that. I want to give you a chance to talk about the business that you're starting now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I actually have a little surprise for you since you're last connected. So I actually just literally yesterday received a nice offer to join a company as a CRO that I think I'll be taking on with in mind of still being able to. It's been very clear that I'm still obviously working on a couple of side hustles. I'm advising for a couple of companies still. And I'm still got my consultant, but this role will allow me to be able to take that on. So I don't want to announce what it is just yet. But they don't even know that I'll be accepting the offer.
You might want to tell them before Monday.
they will know. They will know. It's yeah. So by the time this airs, they will definitely know. So it'll be an exciting role for me to really do something a little different. But in the same ballpark. Again, it's somebody who's willing to give me a shot of taking on more responsibility. I've been in sales. I've become a sales leader. Honestly, I've been looking to be a CRO. That was my dream 5-6 years ago. I'm like, I'm going to be a CRO. And so for the first time now, I'm announcing to you, I've finally have gone there, right? And so it's kind of like this is very new. So for me, I'm like, wow, like I've been working so hard at this, like literally, to get to this point. Now I got to figure out what's next, right? So that's what makes this offer really intriguing, is because I've told myself I want to be CRO for literally since going back to 2017, 2018. I'm like, that's the goal I figured I want to do. And I've been, going into obviously sales director, head of sales, VP of sales, and now CRO. And it's been awesome. So it's me sharing my goosebumps with you. So that I don't want to announce the company just yet, but because we'll got to send an offer first. And
while you've been dreaming of being a CRO for the last several years, I've been dreaming about breaking news and being a true broadcaster. And I feel like I just am breaking news here a little bit, which is exciting. Not to say, by the way, that I'm Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss by any stretch of the imagination. So the likelihood is that the company that you're going to probably won't hear this interview necessarily.
True.
but maybe post after you're there. Maybe you can alert them of the podcast and they can go back and listen to it. Maybe they'll get a kick out of it.
Maybe I could also connect you with somebody there that is an amazing person who is a really huge entrepreneur that I'll be working with very closely.
Yeah.
And you could have a podcast with him.
Oh, there you go. I love it. I love it. Okay, let's wrap up a little bit earlier than normal with what I'm reterming it. See, it was the final five. But then, no, it was the rapid five. But it was the rapid final five, something like that. But it wasn't so rapid because the questions weren't necessarily questions that you could answer rapidly. And then I changed it to final five. But I'm like, that doesn't necessarily brand it all that well. So I'm going back to the rapid five or something like that. Anyway, something about rapid five because these can be answered, I think, rapidly. So, anyways, you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, what motivates you?
Family. Honestly, the cliche answer, but I'm expecting a kid in actually 6 weeks now, and I think that mindset has completely shifted in the way I think. I always heard that answer, I never got it, and now that we're expecting our first kid, like everything, my entire mindset in life completely changed, and I think that like instead of focusing on my next 2, 3, 4 year plan, now I'm thinking about the 10, 20-year plan. So I hate to say that because I think it's so cheesy, but family, 10,000%, my wife, my life, my future kid, like all that stuff, just like, my family, obviously, that honestly, like is always a reminder.
I've felt that way too, since my wife announced that she was, or let me know, I shouldn't say announced, that she was pregnant with my first child. So double congratulations to you, CRO.
Thank you.
The growing family.
Thank you.
Name a big goal you have right now and when you would like to accomplish it.
Well, I was going to say become a CRO. So done. That long-term wealth has been a new goal of mine. I think there's a lot more to it to unpack from that. Long-term wealth is more than just the money aspect, right? Like is being comfortable in making that level of money, because there's so much that comes with it, right? It's like not just work hard to get the money, but it's a sense of accomplishment, is taking care of the family. It's being able to take on new challenges, being able to have the freedom to take on more challenges, right? I think so. Like when I say long-term wealth, it's not just about the money, but it's like, that's a big part of it, right? Of what that long-term wealth is, but like making sure my future kid has everything that I didn't, but not spoil them, obviously, in any shape or form. So it's hard to answer that, honestly. The new goal, Jay, you got me stumped. Honestly, it goes back to like just raising like a good kid, being there for my family, building a foundation, the best foundation I could build for a kid and hopefully future kids as well, to be able to be better in the world. Honestly, that's like my, the whole fatherhood mentality is really like, what can I do to make sure to have a kid who's going to contribute to the world on a different level than anything else? And that's something I'm going to be picking your brain on very, very soon. Because I'm like, Jay, what do you do when your kid does this? Because I am confused. That's a whole different skill set. So like, that's going to be like, that's my primary focus right now. Obviously work and everything else is a big part of it. And the company I'll be joining, if it's on the professional side, is really be able to scale this company 4, 5, 6x to where it's at right now.
I think one of my superpowers is raising happy, healthy kids, by the way. So I'll talk to you.
I'm gonna start a podcast just on that and pick your brain.
That's right. You know how you say take care of people. The four words that you say like 10,000 times. I say happy, healthy kids over and over again like a million times. So there's a path to do it. So far, so
Love
good.
it.
What's your preferred way to learn more information? Stay sharp.
I definitely, podcasts are always great, but articles, blogs, I read so much different. Blogs and articles, I think there's obviously the dime a dozen you can find. Some that agrees with you, some that disagrees with you. But I think it really helps give you different kinds of perspectives. So it's part of my routine, honestly, every day. It's like, I find a topic. Sometimes I can just browse LinkedIn and I find something that somebody said that's resonating with me, or it creates some other thought. And I start researching a different topic that leads me to one thing or another. So it's kind of weird. I really started it's almost like every day I have a good 30-40 minute of just say my own daily research project of just diving into a topic of some sort. Yeah. So it's weird. I don't think that's normal for most people. I think most people will read a book, and I have my books. Don't get me wrong. I don't read the books as often as much as I read everything that I research and dive into a good 30 minutes to an hour a day.
Yeah.
Of just research.
Speaking of hours, how many hours of sleep do you average per night?
We had an incident with our HOA late last night that didn't get me that many hours of sleep. But I take it as practice for the kid. So last night it was 3.5, 4 hours, unfortunately. But again, practice for a kid. But typically 6 hours is more than enough for me. 7 hours would be great, but 8 hours would be also overkill for me. If I oversleep, I feel like I'm not functional the next day. But if I undersleep, also not functional. So if I'm a little tired, I'm a little starving today, that's because I did not sleep that much. So I apologize on that.
6 hours for me too. I'm right there with you.
Nice.
What's your favorite thing to do when you aren't working?
Geez. I like scotch. But it goes back to that. It's crazy how you get older, these cliche answers become more and more true. It's just spending quality time with people I enjoy spending quality time with. That's family, friends. Even if I'm just sitting next to them doing nothing, that feeling is honestly amazing. But we love to hike, and activity-wise, and love to hike with the people I enjoy hiking with, right? Love to hike. We got a couple of dogs, so we keep ourselves busy with them. Literally just finding quality time, unplugging, and I love camping because it's the only way to actually completely disconnect. Give me the most remote place that has no cell reception. That's my favorite pastime, honestly. Just do nothing and completely get lost in the woods. That's everybody needs that reset. So outdoors is what I really enjoy.
For sure. And last question, which would ultimately be question number 6, but an easy one, the easiest one. How can people follow up with you to say thank you, get in touch with you, maybe ask a question I didn't ask, all that wonderful stuff?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. What is it? / Ramsey Al Ramahi, RamseyAlRamahi. Happy to connect, happy to help out in any shape, way, or form. Happy to have these calls, discussions. These things I really care about. I know you care about as well. But yeah, that's the easiest way to find me.
Ramsey Al Ramahi, thank you for going over quota, my friend.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Jay.
Goodbye, everybody. I'm cueing the music.